What's up, my healthy friends? This episode has been a long time coming, and in my mind, I'm really happy that we've finally gotten around to making it happen because it's probably going to, challenge some people's thinkings, and who knows where we're going to end up and where we're going to go. But there's some stuff that's definitely going to open your mind on this episode, which is perfect because in 2023, it's my mission to coach 500 people to stop the binge eating and savage self-talk cycle, so they can lose weight whilst feeling in control and without restriction along the way. Being open-minded is essential to succeeding in that process. So speaking of opening that mind, I want to introduce you to a friend of mine, originally from here in Melbourne. We're kind of in the same broader social circle and see one another a bit at parties and events, and we've even co-worked together before. This man here is Dr. Richard Chambers, and he is a clinical psychologist and a global leader on mindful leadership and mindful education. And alongside that, he also has a professional interest in the application of psychedelics in the context of leadership development. Yes, that's right, a doctor of psychology and psychedelics in the same sentence, which obviously sounds very juicy. Formerly an associate professor in the Center of Contemplative and Consciousness Studies at Monash University, Richard is also a TEDx speaker, the author of 3 books, and has published over 40 research articles in leading journals around the world. Basically, the friends that I hang out with are next level amazing, and Richard is one of those people. So welcome to the show, mate. How you doing?
It's a pleasure to know you, man, and thanks for having me on your show. It's really great to be here.
Oh, it's so good for us to finally get around to doing this. It's like, yeah, why have we done this sooner?
For a while, right?
Yeah. So, man, I love it. I love conversations with psychologists because if there's anything that I've learned throughout my entire journey of health, wellness, personal development, it's really just everything comes down to the mind. And I'm curious because as a young man myself growing up, the idea of psychology was definitely like, only people that have been to war and have PTSD would see a shrink, or anything like that. So I grew up in a country town in Australia. So I'm wondering, what was your journey to becoming a psychologist or becoming interested in that world from a young age?
Yeah, interesting question. I've also lived in small country towns as well as big cities around the world. And there are still countries in the world, actually, still cultures where psychology is seen as something that only crazy people would do. But thankfully, through the work of, tireless work of people like you and so many people have started to sort of destigmatize mental health and launch initiatives, and slowly people are starting to understand that, in fact, everybody could benefit from some therapy. And it doesn't have to just be for serious mental illness. It can be for, low-level sort of everyday high-prevalence stuff like stress and anxiety, or it could be for relationship problems. It could be for, a whole raft of different things, as well as self-improvement. Psychological tools are fantastic things for leadership development, personal development. Yeah, my journey with it was actually quite interesting. I started an arts degree at Melbourne Uni in 1999, and I don't know what I was doing there, to be honest. I was just kind of there. It was a degree that I did like a typical art student, I guess. I was good at writing and humanities. I was like, yeah, might as well, do some arts. And I was doing my undergrad psych, but I just basically wasn't going to class. I mean, looking back, I didn't have the best mental health at that time. I think, difficult childhood experiences and just tough life up to that point had sort of taken its toll. And I was a bit depressed, perhaps, very disengaged from uni, just partying a lot, to be honest. And I didn't pay much attention actually in my undergrad psych degree. I'm quite good at cram studying, so I'd literally borrow people's notes, a whole semester worth of notes, and just cram it in my head, do the exam, do the assessment, immediately forget it. Finished that. Finished third year. Third year, actually, something shifted. I discovered meditation. In fact, going into third year, this story will resonate with your audience. Going into third year, I just got jacked of feeling like crap all the time, and just thought, you know what, I want to make some changes that, I just want to feel better and have a better life. And I engaged in what we now call lifestyle medicine, although back in 1999, you had to really...
that was hippie.
It took a bit of work, but I just thought, maybe I should get 8 hours sleep instead of staying up all night every night. Maybe I should drink water. Maybe I should clean up my diet. And so I just did all those things, started exercising, getting fit and healthy. And I felt physically better,
Mm-hmm.
but the missing ingredient was meditation. And I discovered meditation in my final year just by chance. I mean, again, it was early days. We hadn't coined the term mindfulness. There were no apps. You wouldn't learn it in schools or universities.
Mm-hmm.
And I just I found myself with a Buddhist meditation class just by pure chance, by the way. A friend of mine named Will was heading along and asked me if I wanted to go. And I've had a series of events like that where just sliding doors moments, So I'm in this meditation class and this guy starts talking about how we create all of our own suffering through, it was a Buddhist meditation center. We all have minds that wander. We all get caught up in thinking that makes us unhappy, and we can take control over that if we train our attention with meditation or just being present throughout the day. And it was just life-changing. I mean, as this guy's speaking, I'm like, this is the psychology I want to learn, man. This stuff has relevance to me. And then they taught mindfulness meditation. I started doing that in the weekly classes, and then doing it at home and getting that routine happening. And I just started to feel mentally so much better. And my grades improved. I started to be able to focus. I was also more disciplined. I'd start going to uni from 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and actually stay focused on my studies. Even if I didn't have classes that day, I'd just sit in the library and study. But finishing third year, I was like, psychology, I don't want to do honors. Like, I don't really, what am I going to do? So art students, when they finish their arts degree, they either do honors or they go traveling. So I took the travel option.
Where'd you go?
And Southeast Asia and East Asia. So I went Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, India and Nepal, and just started going deeply into my practice, doing longer retreats and just going for it with my meditation practice.
Wow.
And that really lit a fire in me. And then another meaningful coincidence, walking along a street in the north of India, up near Dharamsala, where the Dalai Lama lives. I was walking between these two towns, Bagsu and McLeod Ganj, and I was just on this windy, dusty road, surrounded by, Himalayan mountains and stuff, with the rickshaw going past. And there was this chai shop, and I stopped, got a chai, and there would have been, there were some books for sale, and I reckon there would have been like 20 books on the shelf, like a tiny little shop.
Yeah.
And the first one I grabbed, a book called Healing Emotions. I open it up, and it's a dialogue between Western neuroscientists and realized Buddhist lamas and serious meditators, and like, how do these things inform one another? And there were these dialogues. There's a conference that used to happen biannually called the Mind and Life Conference, and it was scientists talking to inner scientists.
Yeah.
In the beginning Buddhists, and eventually sort of more wisdom traditions came in, and it branched out from neuroscience to psychologists and epidemiologists, and it was just fascinating. And this book just lit a fire. I'm like, I want to study that.
Wow.
So I came back to Australia, found a supervisor who'd let me do it. Again, just early days, just had to make it happen because I was just so passionate about it. And that just kicked off a whole career in mindfulness. It's led me to now, spending decades teaching it to students and working in businesses. I'm now really, really into the applications of mindfulness for leadership, as people become more focused, more self-aware, more connected to their deeper values, more able to just step back and just inhabit healthier parts of themselves rather than getting caught in, less functional parts of themselves. It's profound. So I'm really inspired by that.
Man, that's amazing. What a journey, and what a sort of serendipitous, few moments in that journey that kind of led you here. I'm curious to ask, like, what drove you more towards, was it that book that drove you more towards the science and the Western application rather than staying in Asia and going full Buddhist monk kind of, because I can imagine on that journey you were on a bit of a seesaw between, and I know I've been on that seesaw maybe going in the other direction myself, which is starting in the Western system, growing up with mum as a nurse, and then sort of being like, oh, actually maybe some of the hippies had it more right than I originally judged them for, So I'm curious, what was the push towards I've got to go back to Australia and go to university to learn about this rather than stay where you were?
Beautiful. Yeah. I mean, two of my deepest, most intrinsic core values are compassion and contribution.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just called to contribute to society. And I obviously I had those moments where I was considering, putting on robes in Thailand or something like that. And there's something that just pulls me back and just says, no, bring this to the people that need it in the West. Bring this to Australian society, to Western society, and I noticed, and this book was a really good example of this, that there is this dialogue going on. There are these, 1,000-year-old wisdom traditions, which are inner sciences. I mean, people seriously have sat for decades observing the most granular stuff about the way their minds work and documenting it, and having successive generations read these manuals and do the practices and tweak them. And they've mapped out the entire, anything you ever want to know about how the mind works, it's all been discovered. However, it's only accessible, it's only verifiable with the tool of introspection meditative practice. So most people are like, they're not going to invest in that. But beautifully, neuroscience and psychology and research, particularly neuroscience, actually is kind of catching up, because all these things that have been discovered are being explored now in brain scanners and in research studies, and so there's this fantastic dialogue. And so I just felt called to be part of that. I think that's why that book resonated with me so much, because I'd done 3 years of psychology. I was considering going back and doing my honours, but I'm like, I don't just want to go back and do it to do it. Do some research, some thesis I'm not interested in. Like, why? What's my why? Why am I doing this? And then I was like, oh, this feels really important. My meditation practice has fundamentally changed my life.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone should learn this. Everyone should understand why it's important to be learning this. We should be teaching it in schools. We should be weaving it through businesses. The leaders and the powerful people definitely should have a practice. And I just got really lit up to bring that back, and somehow that's just happened since. I've just been part of that journey.
As you're describing that, it made me think of astrophysicists, and it's like they tell us that all of this stuff is out there and we just have to believe them. And it's the same idea. It's like, look at all this mindfulness research, and it's like the only way you can experience it is go there yourself. So
in the end, that's true, isn't it? In the end, that's all we can do. But what motivates people is seeing the brain scans,
yes,
and reading the research literature. When I did my honours in 2003, I read every single mindfulness study cover to cover, because there were 43 of them.
Yeah, wow.
and then I published mine as number 44, right?
Yep.
Fast forward to now, there were 2,000 papers published last year, and there's this hockey stick thing going on. It's next level. And so, that's, it's amazing, the enthusiasm for it.
I'm curious, in all of your experience and reading and research, what do you think happened with the Western world? Because obviously these were traditions in many parts of the world for thousands of years. Did the Western world this practice evaporated with the progression of Christianity and that type of thing over history? Or is it that it was actively suppressed? Or, I'm curious where the Western world forgot this tradition or lost it or actively removed it. Because, there's whether you're in Africa or whether you're in South America or Asia, there's thousands of years of history of this stuff. But the Western world, it seems to have disappeared somewhere.
Such an interesting question. You're really making me stop and think for a moment. I mean, my hypothesis would be that, the separation of church and state that came about through the Enlightenment and the Enlightenment values of, just people having rights and, having a rule of process and all those amazing Enlightenment values that we now have, we take for granted, in fact, in our society, but I think sometimes way too much. That separation of church and state was really useful because of the way the church was controlling people's lives, and the empires of the day were just making people's lives miserable. And so there was this kind of a rising of the scientific method.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a shift from the internal, because I guess if you're praying, if you're genuinely practicing any wisdom tradition, you're looking within.
Yep.
If you're a genuine practitioner, it's controversial perhaps to say this, but there are ways of practicing in a pretty superficial way, which unfortunately a lot of people seem to be doing. And then there's the genuine sort of experiential, and all wisdom traditions have that. These days it's Gnostic Christianity, and it's it's Kabbalah, and it's Sufism, and it's Buddhism, and aspects of Hinduism. So we went from looking within to looking without, which is what science is all about, which is like, if it's not verifiable, then I'm probably not going to believe that it's true. And that was an amazing thing, because we went from superstition and control and people not having a lot of freedom or access to information to being able to verify things and question things systematically. And so we started to look without. But I guess we've gotten lost in that. And I'd say the scientism of today, science becoming a religion, anything that can't be verified isn't real. And of course, there are all sorts of things that can't actually be scientifically verified.
Yeah.
I mean, love, the taste of an apple. I mean, it's just, these examples abound. And so we've gotten really caught in science, at its extreme, there's that scientism. And so what I see happening here in this movement is a coming back together, because people were holding that internal wisdom, and we have developed to a high level, double-blinded, triple-blinded, randomized controlled trials and meta-analyses and, functional neuroimaging, and it's coming together with something. And it's like, oh, okay. And so if you can see it, you're more likely to do it. Looping back around to what we were talking about earlier, like when people start to be able to see, oh, here's a study where you get people, put them in a brain scanner, 8 weeks of meditation training. This is one of the classic, Britta Holzell's 2011, like sort of canonical neuroscience papers. 8 weeks later, back in the brain scanner, compare the meditators to a control group. Oh my God, grey matter in the prefrontal cortex, hippocampus, which is the long-term memory area, and insula, which is the interoception area, all like literally grown like a muscle. And you can show people, here's the muscle growth you get from 20 minutes of meditation a day for 8 weeks. And people are like, oh, okay, tell me more. And then, of course, there's all these research papers around that, and how it's like most of it's still focused on mental health. I've been trying to push the needle a bit in the direction of education over the last 20 years, realizing that, my God, if there had been like a Smiling Mind app or anything at all in my schooling, I would have probably had I would have heard that message, I reckon, and had a different life, an easier life. And also now, of course, pushing it into the leadership development space, because if we can strengthen parts of our brain and strengthen parts of ourselves with neuroplasticity and allow other less functional parts of ourselves to sort of start to atrophy, you could say, or
the unhelpful parts, hopefully.
That's Or if we can look within and get to know ourselves really deeply, if we can get in touch with core values, if we can be more embodied, so that we're more genuinely connected with ourselves and with others and with the earth. That's the foundation of well-being. And it's also the foundation of effective leadership, because it's pretty hard to make, terrible antisocial decisions, polluting people's water systems or exploiting people when you're really deeply connected with your heart and your gut and in your body. So, it's a powerful tool.
It totally is. I'm going to butcher the quote, but there's a quote that came to mind when you were talking there about the coming together, because I think, we went from a place maybe in history where faith was required for, and not just religious faith, but just belief in a process or belief in an idea in order for it to occur. A lot of people just said, sure, because they didn't have that physical evidence to look at and measure and say, okay, this makes sense. And so now we've gone maybe too far the other way, which, as you just described, it's like if it's not tangible in physical reality, then it's not true until a scientist or a doctor tells me it's so. And then the coming together of those worlds. And there's a quote that's like, religion and science can coexist. Science is just too young to understand. And so maybe there is a place where, both of those things do coexist. And maybe the mind melting moment is that when we realize they're the same thing. Oh my God, I'm sorry.
that might be a pretty good moment for humanity, right? And luckily luckily there are scientists out there who have deep meditation practices or are deeply interested in the world's wisdom traditions. And of course, as we know, there are scientists out there of all flavors interested in psychedelics, which again helps connect those worlds, because you can't avoid it when you're deep in a psychedelic ceremony or process, and you can't avoid it when you've got a genuine meditation practice. It's not your 5 minutes a day from your app to manage your stress levels, but is something a bit more profound than that. It brings them back together. And we're seeing, culturally, globally, we're seeing a shift away from scientism. I mean, you mentioned before astrophysics. I literally know people that are convinced the Earth is flat, right? I mean, we all
Same.
probably know. We all know those people, and it's interesting talking to them.
It is.
Because obviously there's so many things that we know intuitively just negate that, nip that right in the bud. But when they ask you to demonstrate it, okay, there's actually not much we can demonstrate.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you can with mathematical models, and you can call someone on the other side of the world, oh, it's dark there, it's light here. What does that say about the nature of reality? However, it's interesting. And so I think that's a shift away from giving away all of our power to, people in white coats, to the scientists, to the whoever, like people, and coming back to like, well, hang on, what do I think, and what's true in my direct experience, which is kind of a funny, whimsical, tragic sign of that swing back from scientism to something that's perhaps a marriage of science and inner knowing.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the flat Earth thing, because it's conversations with a couple of people that I know and respect that truly believe the Earth is flat. That I really came around to the idea, well, if I can't show you myself, then I will actually surrender to the possibility that you're right. And so
Yeah.
it's not me saying I believe that. I'm just saying I've never been to space and flown a shuttle around the world, and therefore I do not actually know. I've been told by lots and lots of different people that this is so, but it's just Chinese whispers if I'm really, honest about it. It's like I don't tangibly know. And P.S., neither do you. You mentioned psychedelics in there, though. Like, maybe flat Earth theories or round Earth theories came from psychedelic experiences.
Something came from psychedelics. In fact, a lot of things, if you start peeling back the layers and looking deeply, a lot of things have come from psychedelics. I mean, for instance, there are two amazing books that I'd pitch to your audience. One is Brian Murarescu's The Immortality Key, which talks about how psychedelics is at the foundation of Western thought and Western religion, how there was a 2,000-year Burning Man festival happening in the ancient world, that for 2,000 consecutive years, people would make a pilgrimage, which they go to once in their life, and consume some kind of very potent psychedelic brew, and have the insights that have led to things like democracy, and led to things like trigonometry. I mean, your whole year 7 algebra class went to this festival, Pythagoras and etc. I think Socrates or Plato, I think it was Socrates went, Marcus Aurelius went. I mean, this was like all the big thinkers of that era were going to this festival and taking psychedelics. And it was Socrates, I think, who said that if this festival ever stops for any reason, we're in deep trouble.
Yeah.
As humanity. And it was, of course, shut down by the church because it was, plant medicines administered by women and looking within and taking back our power rather than giving it away. So that was shut down. Another really good book actually is what's his name? Mike Crowley, The Secret Drugs of Buddhism. That blew my mind because I've spent 20 years practicing Buddhism in different flavors, including I think 12 years in Tibetan Buddhism. And you've all seen statues and those paintings of the different Buddha forms, which are different aspects of consciousness reflected visually. And they're always holding a bowl and flowers and malas and all swords and all sorts of stuff. But 90% of them are holding a bowl.
Yeah.
And in that bowl is a psychedelic brew, because in Hinduism, if you go back to the days of Hinduism, the earliest books, the Rig Veda, the earliest 5,000-year-old Hindu texts, all talk about soma, which is this plant medicine that was at the core of a lot of their particularly tantric rituals. Fast forward a few thousand years, and Buddhism basically, again, controversial comment here, but it's true, they rebranded a lot of Hinduism. New insights had come from a particular historical figure, but they rebranded it, and soma became Amrita. And Amrita is a central part of, I've done empowerments and initiations in the Tibetan Buddhist traditions where you're given Amrita, but it's water with like petals floating in it. And it's a placebo basically.
Yeah, right.
And this guy, Mike Crowley, makes a very strong case based on scriptural evidence, graphical evidence, like just open and shut. I mean, he gets in a tunnel where everything in Buddhism is mushrooms. But it's quite, it's interesting how people get sort of caught up in this. But he paints a really compelling case that at the foundation of Tantric Buddhism is a psychedelic sacrament. And so it's really interesting when you start experiencing these ideas and realizing this is at the foundation of society. I mean, the stoned ape hypothesis.
I was going to bring that up.
Hominid ancestors, good, yeah.
The Terence McKenna stoned ape theory, yeah.
Yeah. Like right there, like we are ancient hominid ancestors. Maybe it's a theory.
Yeah.
May have been. Well, they were following herds and hunting them. Those herds were shitting on the ground. Out of those cow pads, basically, psychedelic mushrooms are growing. We know all of this is true. It's possible, some might say likely, that they might have eaten a mushroom as they're hunting. They're literally following the poop and the footsteps, and there's mushrooms. Someone must have eaten one. I don't know how we figured out which mushrooms are poisonous, which ones aren't. I guess that was just
enough people
scientific, Darwinistic process.
The beginning of science.
The beginning of science. So I dare you to eat it, I dare you. And then someone ate it, and then maybe like, and brain, because it was around that time that our brain grew massively, and no one knows why that happened.
Yeah, there's a massive unexplainable chapter of history where the brain, grew in such large amounts.
Hockey stick. We were starting to cook food, which means better absorption of fat, which means better growth of white matter in the brain. Maybe, did aliens come down and combine their DNA with ours? I don't know, but this is a pretty compelling hypothesis. And so maybe at the foundation of human consciousness, religion, philosophy, politics, just thought is psychedelics, because that's where all of the world's religions came from. They originally came out of or replaced animistic, like nature-based, psychedelic-based, traditions.
Yeah. Well, even if you go, depending which rabbit hole you go down, like the story of Santa Claus, is connected to mushrooms as well, right? Like, which is just
100%.
It's just mind blowing, and it's funny too that this repeats in a lot of the work or the research that I do in multiple areas. So going back to your uni story and your undergrad, you were like, not too focused or not too interested. I was similar, and so what I wanted to do is I wanted to be able to pass without having to study, and so I went to this guy's who did a TED talk. Joshua Foer is his name, and he's a memory.
Yeah, I know him.
Yeah, he's a memory specialist.
Well, not personally, but yes.
Yeah. So I learnt all of his techniques, took a few of his classes and education stuff that he was selling, and basically I wanted to be able to continue partying, into years 3 and 4 without having to do any less. And I learnt all of these amazing memory techniques. And part of the learning, though, was that these techniques in like the 1500s were wiped out of education systems because the church was, and this is the way the story goes, the church was threatened by the degree of creativity that they using these techniques promoted in free-thinking children. And so it's funny that, again, the church comes up as we'll restrict you from thinking that way because, you never know where free-thinking men and women end up, right? Outside of the control or the reach of the big hand.
So interesting, your story there, and it's a really interesting example of the downside to organized religion. The baby, however, of course, went out with the bathwater, because we now are existing, and youth of today are growing up in a moral vacuum.
Yeah.
No idea about any meaningful values whatsoever, caught up in the most shallow, Instagram-based, TikTok-influenced, capitalistic, superficial, I want to be an influencer, like just a vacuum of anything meaningful. And we wonder why our mental health rates are just plummeting, and we wonder why the Earth's getting more and more messed up. And so we threw something out, because our grandparents, their social circles were probably the Christian church and hanging out at the church and Sunday school, and woven in there, as well as all of the stuff that we're pretty happy to have gotten rid of, was some pretty deep, at least ideas, if not practices, at least some deep ideas about what it means to be a good human being. So again, things like mindfulness, things like positive psychology, things like psychedelics, they bring us back to that, to those kinds of questions and those kinds of insights, and that's a really powerful thing.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. On that note, with psychedelics, like, it is because of the history that we've sort of briefly touched on, it is such a taboo topic, and people listening are probably like, is this guy really a clinical psychologist? My psychologist or doctor wouldn't talk about this. Like, it's starting to
Not yet.
come into the conversation, and it's been legalized in a bunch of states in the US, and there's been a change in the standard or where it sits in the hierarchy of drugs in Australia. So the TGA have shifted it, and soon it will be able to be prescribed by psychiatrists in Australia. So there is a big shift happening. So like, sort of for the the person who's new to this or considers psychedelics as just something that happened in the 70s and should definitely stay there, like, why is this coming back, and why are we allowing it, given it's an illegal drug?
Yeah, so you're describing, particularly in the Australian context, the rescheduling of psilocybin and MDMA from Schedule 9,
Mm-hmm.
which was highly restricted, available only through strictly controlled clinical trials for very specific diagnoses, to Schedule 8, which means still very specific diagnoses need to be indicated for their use, but now rather than needing to get into a clinical trial, certain psychiatrists with a particular type of training can now start to administer these what's called the medicines, I guess, in sort of in a much more accessible way. So it's another step to making them more accessible for people. Still in the realm of health, mental health, which is of course driving this whole train and super important given the meaning crisis and the mental health concerns I was talking about a moment ago. So that's a big shift. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out on the ground, because at the moment, technically, you're going to have a psychiatrist sitting with you for, 2 hours, maybe, in the context of, ketamine's not even on that list yet, but that's the shortest acting one, or DMT and ketamine are. And then things like psilocybin. That's a big commitment. You take a big dose of psilocybin. That's at least like 6-7 hours before you can be put in a taxi and go home.
Absolutely.
Right? And MDMA is pretty similar kind of half-life, I think. So it's going to be a big burden on the healthcare system. So it'll be interesting to see how that actually plays out on the ground. But it's a big deal, and it's interesting that you mention actually people's reactions to psychedelics. I live in a pretty rarefied world because most of the people that I choose to hang out with meditators, people who have a spiritual practice and or are interested in psychedelics for whatever reason in whatever capacity. So most people in my orbit seem pretty open to the idea,
Mm-hmm.
except maybe older generations. My parents, one of my mentors is a medical educator and the most open-minded person. Like he's been teaching lifestyle medicine. You should have him on your show. Actually, I'll introduce you. His name's Craig Hazzard.
Amazing.
He's my, like, we were doing the mindfulness thing at Monash for the last 12 years. I've now stepped away. I'm still I'm in an adjunct associate professor role, but
yeah,
I'm not sort of operationally involved. So he's been weaving mindfulness and lifestyle medicine through the medical curriculum at Monash for 40 years. He's been teaching mindfulness at Monash it's in the core curriculum now in about 22 different units. I've helped him drive that.
That's amazing.
He planted those seeds. This guy's so open-minded, philosopher, Shakespeare fan, deep meditator. And one of the first things I did when I got interested in psychedelics was to write a journal article on the theoretical synergies between mindfulness and psychedelics, how mindfulness might be good for people taking psychedelics and how psychedelics might help deepen and shift a mindfulness practice. And he was my avatar client. He was the person I was trying to convince. Because when I first mentioned my interest in psychedelics, this open-minded dude who's literally been fighting the good fight to get a few hours of medical students' time to teach them about the importance of sleep and social connection and diet and exercise. Stuff that to me and you is just so patently obvious. Constant pushback. Why are we teaching this crap in our course? No one else is doing this. We should carve back these hours and teach them a bit more pharmacology or up their clinical skills or something.
Yeah.
Unbelievable, right? And so I wrote this paper deliberately speaking to him, because he thought, when I first mentioned my interest in psychedelics, he was like, he's been so red-pilled with the war on drugs, this like ideologically driven war on plant medicines and war on certain states of consciousness, to be
Yeah,
honest.
for sure.
He's been so red pill. When I mentioned it, he's like, doesn't that cause psychosis? And I was just like, face palms. Like, that's how deep this has gone in our society. And my
Yeah.
parents the same, and your parents probably the same, and a
Yeah.
lot of older generations, and probably even a lot of people now have this fear, because it was just, I mean, look, potted history of psychedelics, discovery of, thousands of years of use and stuff. But the thing that drove it the most was the LSD research happening,
Yeah.
this accidental discovery of LSD, and then these clinical trials and these, just thousands of trials, and sometimes like single session cures for lifelong mental health problems and addictions, and just profound stuff. And then psychedelics getting out into the public consciousness and changing the fabric. I mean, talk about, changing consciousness, like the hippie generation completely questioning their parents' views of the world and mindsets, and their parents' parents, and everything had been kind of iterating on the same theme. And then all of a sudden, boop, there's this whole other thing that's happened, which we still are integrating into our society. And then that just got a bit threatening. Tune in, turn on, drop out, at a time of social unrest and anti-Vietnam War protesting, and idiot avatars like Timothy Leary getting out there and kind of, like tune in, turn on, drop out, and just threatening the establishment, who basically said, all right, well, enough of that. So they shut it down. And, and it's been basically, it didn't go away. It just went underground.
Of course.
People have been delivering this stuff for all sorts of purposes, whether it's, well-being, mental health, healing, like personal development. It's just been happening underground. And there's been, medical professionals involved in this from some of the conversations I've been having. And then there's been a thawing. There's been amazing work done, by organizations like MAPS, Rick Doblin, like 30 plus years of just clinical trials and lobbying to get MDMA rescheduled from absolutely completely illegal and unacceptable for use in any circumstances, anywhere, at any time, to like maybe in a clinical trial. But we're gonna like police it, and so people like that have done amazing work, and it's really exploded back into our consciousness at a time that I guess it kind of fits, because again, while we've swung a bit away from scientism, perhaps into flat earthness and the woke movement and all this stuff, which is like a reclaiming of emotion and a reclaiming of embodiment. And again, really useful, going way too far, but that's how pendulums tend to go.
Yeah.
There's this, at the same time as that, perhaps coincidentally, perhaps not, there's this psychedelic renaissance going on where, these tools are making their way into society that, used well, and I know we're becoming sort of getting towards maybe the end of our time today. Maybe we can have another chat about this later. But used well, I just want to make this point, because these things can be used real badly, really badly.
Yeah.
Used well, which for me is with a clear intention and an existing mindfulness meditation practice to hold whatever comes up with awareness and compassion. Ideally, like in a good set and setting. So you want to be in a good mindset and also in a good setting. So ideally, you want to be like in a ceremonial space where there's an intention for healing.
Yeah.
Or around really good friends, like maybe a sitter, or if you want to use them recreationally, like I'm not opposed to that. I might do that every now and then. Just doing it smart. You don't want to have your first mushroom, journey, taking some shrooms at a party with people you don't know. You don't want to drop 2 tabs of acid at a music festival and just have a terrible, it's really not smart. So when done well, these things are a powerful tool, again, for just perhaps reconnecting us back from this overly heady, intellectualizing, disconnected way of living, which is what science and technology's done for us. Reconnecting us back to something that we forgot, but never really forgot. It's just been kind of existing in our, Jungian collective unconsciousness, or whatever's been going on, or underground psychedelic movements and underground hippie meditative movements, and or Eastern cultures doing their meditative piece, and it's all of a sudden it's like, oh, how are these things reconnecting? And so that's what we're seeing, and that's what the rescheduling from Schedule 9 to Schedule 8 is. It's like it's coming back together and saying, oh, maybe there is a place, strictly controlled, got to be scientific, can only be psychiatrists that are administering this. got to have the evidence, random, where the randomized controlled trials, blah, 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 blah. Which is actually, serves a purpose too. So we don't
Of
get
course,
Timothy Learys and people jumping off buildings and, not that happens. That's so low prevalence, but you wait till the first person jumps off a building, has a psychotic episode, something bad happens. The media is going to make that sound like that's the inevitable consequences of taking psychedelics. Although we've learned a lot from the mindfulness movement, because early on, when I was getting into mindfulness research, it was all starry eyes and like, oh my God, this is the panacea to cure everything on the earth and it's good for everyone and everybody should do it in every context. And, that's just obviously not true. If you've got psychosis or you're at risk of psychosis, it'd be a really good example. Maybe don't, so don't do that, or do it in a more controlled kind of way. And we've learned from that now, because there was a backlash, the mindfulness movement and the dark night of the soul, Britta Holes, all that work around, like, what was her name? Blanking. Anyway, there's a really great researcher who's kind of made it her mission to talk about the dark side of meditation. It's kind of made it her, like, it's probably gone a bit intense, that message, but and putting people off because it's pretty low prevalence. But we want to learn from those mistakes and make sure that this psychedelic renaissance gets done in a well thought out and controlled, but not too controlled way. I mean, So
I think any discouragement of exploration, just period, because it might go bad, is in itself a bad idea, because the idea that exploration on any level is not going to be fraught with challenge and difficulty, and that's part of the course, right? It's sure there's a dark night of the soul, you need one, obviously, right? That's part of therapy. It's the idea that you need the suffering and the struggle to show you what really matters, to be able to figure out what's wrong, to be able to figure out what you want to be right, And I think that, in order to, if it's just stay away from the hot stove because it's hot, it's like, well, but the hot stove still cooks stuff and that's pretty useful.
Every generation of kids, there's going to be some that want to touch the hot stove to see if it's really hot or what that hotness feels like. And so we might as well bring this out into the open and say, hey, this is happening. When I talk to I don't do clinical work anymore, but anytime I talk to anybody who's interested in this, particularly when I was a psychologist and my clients were sort of interested, it's like, well, you can use any drug can be used to wake up or to go to sleep. Some drugs, I think, arguably, there'd be people that would disagree, like Carl Hart, who wrote, Drug Use for Adults. He would say that heroin is just as good as psilocybin. Personally, my intuitive gut sense is that I think some drugs are more likely to put us to sleep or take us into places we don't want to go, ice and heroin perhaps being, shining examples of that. And then other substances like the psychedelics are things that can wake us up, if they're used skillfully. And of course, you can get totally, lost in them. And, cannabis is a good example. You can sit on the couch smoking bongs and playing PlayStation, which I did when I was young. And that was just, sativa weed in Melbourne, Australia. It's like, it's just numbing, mind numbing, stunting, actually emotionally stunting. Whereas, if you perhaps have some indica or some hash, or you use it just to smoke a bit of a joint and go and play some music or do some dancing or get out in nature, okay, waking you up. So it's really about how we use it. And that's the narrative I'd love us to be having with the young people of today. In fact, with everybody, like alcohol, the same. My partner's Italian, Elisa. She actually is the one Italian on the planet that doesn't drink. But when I hang out with her drinking friends, no one's getting drunk. They might get tipsy, but mostly they're just enjoying a glass of wine, which they've been doing since they were kids at the dinner table. And you contrast that again with the Australian binge drinking experience. Totally different. It can wake you up. It can put you to sleep. And again, so it's the intention we have behind the things that we do, the intention that we have behind, the using of drugs, as an example, and the containers we use that in, and the mindsets and the intention. Like I don't generally take, drugs to numb myself, right? I'm trying to come out of those habits as much as I can. But I'm interested in, using certain substances to wake up and enhance my meditation practice or deepen my connection with myself or with the earth or with other people. And that's what I'm hoping we'll see more and more and more of in the psychedelic space.
It's going back to before you mentioned when you were talking about people often think of your mentor who thinks about the psychosis. Doesn't that cause psychosis? I thought that was really apt, which you then led into like the wake up or go to sleep stuff. Because I spoke to someone today, and I was like, "Oh, I'm going to be hanging out with Richard. This is who Richard is. What should I ask Richard?" And I love her dearly. She's a fabulous human. But her reaction was the same. She's a nurse, and she basically said, we know all about the psychosis that marijuana can cause. So, if I can just manage my health and wellness with, the food and breath work and all of those kinds of things, I might just do that. That feels safer. And I just hurdled back a curveball where I was like, hang on. We change our state and manipulate ourselves into maybe some level of psychosis with sugar on a daily basis, with alcohol on a weekly basis. And sugar, causes, it's debilitated half the world, sugar, arguably, right? And shortened their lives. And so it's funny where we've grown up in these worlds with such authoritarian, governments around this topic. That we grow up with this idea, well, if a bad thing can happen, it's bad. It should be illegal. And it's like, well, in that case, shouldn't sugar be illegal? Shouldn't alcohol be illegal? Shouldn't tobacco be illegal? It's this. We can't have that black and white thinking.
That's correct. It's shark attacks and car accidents, like you've got this high prevalence thing that no one thinks about. And then you've got this horrible thing that makes the news and everybody's deeply terrified of because it's literally something from the deep coming to get you, which represents in some Jungian way, of course, deepest psychology. It's exactly the same with psychedelics. You see people like, you see the arguments for criminalizing psychedelics. It causes, schizophrenia in a small group of people, or people will jump off rooftops. And of course that happens. But how many people are dying today in Melbourne, Australia from the effects directly or indirect of sugar, alcohol, tobacco? I mean, it's just, if you bring a statistician's lens to that, an epidemiological lens, it just doesn't stand up for 1 second, that argument.
Or prescription drugs. Like ibuprofen in the US kills 16,000 people a year because of gastrointestinal bleeding. Like
next level.
Yeah. Yep. And I mean, not that we're deep into the psychedelic research, but something tells me it's going to be a much lower number.
Yeah, exactly.
That's one drug.
Yeah, exactly. Again, if done well. And the other thing is, you've got to feel for the nurses and doctors of the world. You got to feel for the psychologists of the world. Because the majority of them probably, I'm guessing, I can't say the majority of them aren't open to experimenting themselves, but think about the self-selection bias of the data they're getting.
Yeah.
People don't walk into the ER at St. Vincent's and say, "Hey guys, I've just come in to say that I am high as balls on LSD and it is amazing, and I just want to thank you for the beautiful work that you do here, saving lives. I'm just so grateful to you. Thank you for dedicating your whole..." That's not happening, is it? If they have it a little bit more, maybe it would counterbalance views like your friends, where they'd be like, one of my old psychology supervisors, same thing, just towards psychedelics, because the people that came to see her usually needed to be put back together again. And that's the context in which they were talking about psychedelics. And what percentage of psychedelics users is that? We actually don't really know.
Yeah.
I've been doing some research with colleagues from my old psychedelic startup, and we're finding, really low prevalence. However, if you have a family history of psychosis, or a personal history of psychosis, or bipolar, or you're on certain medications like SSRIs, or you have a personal or family history of seizures, these are all risk factors. So it's really good that we know about that. But we're talking, I think 0.5% kind of thing. Like, it's just really, really, really low.
Yeah.
Not there.
Yeah.
But just really low. And so I think, and of course, then those edge cases and isolated sort of outliers get seized upon by a medical establishment that doesn't want this to happen, or by the media who has been red-pilled. And then it becomes this giant thing, and it reinforces the narrative, and we go on and on. But that's, of course, slowly, thankfully shifting. And I really hope this movement continues. I really hope that this just continues to unfold in an intelligent way, having learned from the mistakes of the past, perhaps.
Yeah, me too. I had my first, and maybe we'll talk about this on another podcast, but I had my first multiple day kind of retreat experience last year, and on psilocybin mushrooms, and it was just phenomenal. But something I don't think we've touched on, which we should in the next time we catch up, is just the importance of follow-up and integration and management and stuff like that. I think
100%.
because it shouldn't just be a weekend thing and then your life's fixed. There's a lot more to go with it. And I just want to make sure that people listening don't get this like, oh, it's that easy kind of attitude towards it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm feeling another chat as well, and I'm happy to come on and continue this. I could talk to you for the next 2 hours about this. I mean, as you can tell, these things tend to light me up. These are very dear to my heart.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's talk about that next time. But just to signpost that, I mean, you've hit it there. Like, the evidence is still emerging, but what looks like based on what we've learned from psychedelic therapy, based on what psychedelically assisted therapy, based on what I was exploring in a startup, which I'm now no longer involved in, but delivering psychedelic retreats for business leaders and designing mindfulness-based programs, some kind of preparation is really important. You want to know a little bit about what to expect. The number one rule is just go with it. Whatever's coming up is okay, and it'll pass. And if you resist it, it'll persist. What you resist persists, and in fact, it's gonna if you're not wanting to experience something unpleasant, it's going to get more and more and more unpleasant as you become anxious about feeling unpleasant, and then anxious about feeling anxious and spiraling. So, good preparation. I personally think mindfulness is like one of the best possible foundations because it's a systematic training in staying present with whatever's happening.
Yeah.
And cultivating some compassion towards yourself along the way. I mean, how useful is that going to be if you bump into unpleasant experiences, which not everyone does?
Yeah.
We can have really blissful experiences, but sometimes it can be a bit challenging, especially at higher doses, or if there's some stuff that needs to be resolved, some unresolved trauma or some unresolved emotional stuff. So good preparation. And spiritual teachers, even like Tara Brach, I heard recently talking to psychedelic leader Roland Griffiths, talking to him about how, her own use of psychedelics, which is quite recent, and how mindfulness and meditation is the foundation that she recommends for that. So one of the biggest thought leaders in the world in the meditation space, talking about mindfulness meditation particularly, and self-compassion practices being useful. And then, as you said as well, it's very easy to go and do a weekend or week-long psychedelic retreat, or a meditation retreat, or a wellness retreat, or any kind of deep process. And we all know the experience of going to that. Let's just take a typical example that will resonate with all your listeners. Like, you go to that wellness retreat, go to Bali, sit by the pool, drink a bunch of juices, do yoga in the morning, get massages, feel next level amazing, come home, hit the desk Monday morning, inbox, coffee, whatever, TV at night, glass of alcohol to switch off, maybe after a few weeks, but gone. 3 months later, it's like, did I even go? Same thing with a meditation retreat. Same thing potentially with a psychedelic retreat. The insights you get, you'll never lose them. But unless you have a way of integrating those insights into your life, what do they really mean? You might know deeply in your heart in one moment that you are like completely interconnected, inseparable, in fact, from, like, in every cell of your being, you might feel your inseparability from all other beings on the planet, from everything in existence. I mean, these are the peak experiences that people have. And that's it's a oneness with reality. It's a moment of satori or enlightenment. It's connection with God. These are the ways people talk about it. It's and it's like profound.
Yeah.
But if you're not then integrating that, how's that going to stick in a society that lives almost from the opposite mindset of, we're all just doing our thing. Science is broken up into silos. People have broken up into tribes and silos within the tribes, and we're disconnected from everyone and everything, and we're scrolling and wondering why we're getting, just more and more fucked up, right? So, if you don't integrate it. So, preparation, integration, and a proper set and setting, there's your formula. How long that preparation integration needs to be, don't know. I put together an 8-week course. That seems reasonable. Psychedelic therapists will do 2 sessions before, 2 sessions after, and maybe 2 sessions during with the psychedelics. So we don't know yet, but something like that. So let's talk about that next time. I'd love to talk more about that with you if you like.
Sounds amazing, man. I've loved this chat, and I really feel like I'm going to get some messages about this podcast. So, which is good. It's good. Like, I like that we can push the envelope and And I know that you and I, well, you for much longer than myself, but you and I are in this world where this is really normal stuff, sort of in our personal lives and you professionally. But for many people, this will be the first time, and though it might be like, whoa, like, this is really confronting, or whatever it might be. So I like that we can do that for people. But if people are listening and just loving what you're saying, which obviously if they're still listening at this point, they are loving what you're saying, where can they find you on the internet?
If you Google my name, Dr. Richard Chambers, hit my website. That's probably the best protocol. That's got all my socials listed, contact details there, as well as my free downloadable meditations, a list to links to all of my popular media and academic articles, my books I've written. So there's trove of free stuff there. So drrichardchambers.com would be a really good place to go.
Awesome. I will put that link down in the show notes. So scroll down there and click the link and get involved in Richard's world. I highly recommend it. It's a good place to hang out. And so for everybody listening, we want to leave them with something juicy. What is one piece of health information that you wish more people knew about?
Interesting question.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Hopefully there's been plenty of juice in our conversation today. I certainly feel enlivened by it, and I'm hoping at least one or two of your audience members will as well.
So much juice.
Of your listeners. Oh, man, my approach to wellness is it needs to be integrated. I'm going to use the word integrated that comes to mind. I am really interested in maintaining good psychosocial, like physical health, psychological health, social health, and just doing a bit of everything every day. I'm not like a massive hours in the gym guy. I've got a pull-up bar, just got myself a 20-kilo weight vest because I'm just needing a bit of extra weight. But I just do body weight workouts at home, work my cardio, work my flexibility, mobility, and then I go dancing to connect with other people. I love conscious dance, ecstatic dance, and particularly contact improv dancing. Go out in nature, spend time connecting with nature. These are all ways of exercising and doing things like that. I love to just eat sort of intuitively, but well. My baseline, I think, is pretty good. So just doing a little bit of exercise or something every day throughout the day, trying to integrate it through my life. And I think if people understood that it's not, we don't need to do really intense things like diets or massive lifestyle change or getting into the gym for hours at a time, just a little bit every day. I do a 20 to 30 minute workout a day, but I do it every day. Mm-hmm. And that I'm in great shape. I feel amazing in my body, and I just it's a consistent thing that I've built up over decades, I guess. And I guess I have pushed it. I've done the sort of the raw food thing way back around the time I was doing that meditate. So before the paleo and blah, blah, blah movements, I was like fruitarian in 2001, for a little while just to see what that was like. And I guess when you go to the limit of something and then realize that that's just an extreme outlying place to be, and then you come back towards the middle, it's shifted the needle perhaps in a slightly healthier direction.
Yeah.
And, so I guess maybe sometimes it is good to do those intense things and do those retreats and have those experiences, or get into some kind of, massive new wellness practice, or try, keto for a couple months or something like that. But then, I don't know, what does a sustainable life look like? What does an integrated life look like? It's pretty hard to hang out with hardcore ketos or raw fooders.
Yes.
And maybe there's something that's no disrespect to building keto. I mean, I know people feel amazing and it's powerful and whatever, but if eventually you realize, hey, this is actually meaning it's hard to hang out with people and I'm losing that social connection, and maybe there's something in that social connection that's going to offset the value of, eating a few carbs every now and then. So I don't know. I guess that's probably my 2 cents worth on that.
Yeah, 1 tweak a week, make small changes over time, and be consistent. I like it. I think that's a fantastic approach. And for anybody listening, if you've enjoyed this episode, you want to share it with a friend, please do so, because we want to help make the world a healthier place, one podcast share at a time. So we'd appreciate that. And thanks for being here. And thanks, Richard. I appreciate your time, and I can't wait for the next one.
Me neither, man. I love chatting to you, man. So good.
Sweet, dude. We'll catch you soon.
See ya.
Bye.